So welcome everyone to the HyreSnap podcast. Today's episode we have Robert Kaminski. He's an expert on marketing and product. What do you feel would be missing? Do you have any feeling like in HR specifically, I would add this component, or I would also focus on this, that, or do you feel like you can use the normal framework?
The awkward thing about hiring is it is this somewhat longer term commitment. In my eyes, it's a 12 to 36 month type commitment on both sides, at least up front. You don't really know what you're going to get until they're in there. And so one thing I've been really curious about, at least in my business, about how we hire folks is is there a better way for us to bring them into the company, have us work together and really see if it's a fit?
Nice to see you, Robert. How are you?
Doing great. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited also. I think this is a very interesting conversation because, we're mixing two different backgrounds, HR and marketing, and trying a live experiment. So this is going to be very interesting. So welcome everyone to the HyreSnap podcast. So in today's episode, we have Robert Kaminski. He's an expert on marketing and product. I'm gonna, let you introduce yourself in a moment. Just want to give context of what we're doing here. So basically, this is value content for HR managers, for startup owners, and for just people in the tech industry. And HyreSnap is a leading HR company. We're helping thousands of companies around the world. We're helping them hire better. So we're helping them solving their interviewing issues and by outsourcing technical interviews and taking all of that burden out of their engineers. Many engineers have very, very difficult, like timelines in their work, and they don't have 5 or 10 hours to spend every week filtering candidates. So HyreSnap outsources that with top experts from Google or top startups in the market. And HyreSnap is, we're also a recruitment company. So we headhunt the candidates, we show them up to the companies, and then we do the technical interviewing. So we save a lot of time. We save around 80% of the initial interviewing efforts and give better candidates. So that's what we do. And yes, please, I would like to have a bit more of context of you, Robert, your background, your work, and what you do with your company.
Yeah, of course. First off, thanks for having me. So my background, I co-founded a company called Fletch PMM, and we're a product marketing consultancy aimed at helping startups with their positioning and messaging. So more specifically, we're really trying to help them better explain what they do and the value they provide to a specific audience, which sounds simple, but when you're in a startup, the context and the ground is always shifting. And there's this tension of, going after a big market and beating that market with getting early traction. And what tends to happen then is like all the messaging is all over the place. And so that's what we come in and help them. As for my background, I've done tours of duty across product, sales, and marketing. 95% of my career I've spent in startups. I did spend a little bit of time at Oracle doing product marketing to see, what that side of the world looks like in terms of crafting messaging and positioning products. But very much focused on early stage commercialization has been really my whole career.
That's amazing. And I think in the startup industry, there's a lot of need for all of that. Startups are extremely innovative, and it's easier when you're doing something that is more common. You're a bank. You know what the value proposition of that is. So many startups have this very interesting value propositions, but really wording that I think as HyreSnap, that has been a whole journey for us, has been a whole journey to explain people this, right? But what I was saying, basically, like, why do you need to outsource your interviews? Why recruiting like this is better? Why this is the future of recruitment? And I can definitely understand how so many startups can get help from what you're doing. So yeah, awesome job. And yeah, thank you for being
Well, it's interesting. You even bring up the example of the bank. They have positioning challenges too. It's like everyone's a bank. And so they have to show up like, why your bank? Like, how do you stand out in a market? Like, banking has been around for decades. And so what do you say? How do you get people to see you in a different light? And so even though we focus on startups, those same fundamentals of standing out in a crowded market with really clear and differentiated messaging still becomes a challenge for really any company. The tactics just get a little bit different depending on how mature the market is and what you actually have at your disposal in terms of resources and credibility and long standing in the market.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. You're right. That and yeah, absolutely. Even startups are creating a difficult time for banks, so I think they also are trying to catch up. So this is useful for everyone. We'll see how this applies to HR, which is one of the things we're going to do today. That's going to be very interesting. But yeah, before that, I just wanted to ask you, like in general, many of our, a lot of our audience is just people from startups and entrepreneurs and people that is creating amazing tech products. So, what is your advice for someone that is starting to build an exciting product? What would be a couple simple tips or advice you would give them in terms of product and in terms of communicating what they're building?
Yeah. I've got 3 things, and they're really foundational and fundamentals. The funny thing is most startups, their fundamentals, they just don't have these. And so number 1, be willing to get specific, especially when you're a small company. Now, what does that mean? It means being specific on exactly who you're for and what the product does. And often what the product does folds into like, when would I use you? And what workflow, because we primarily work in B2B, where does this fit into the operations of how you're doing things today? Far too often what will happen is the opposite of being specific, where folks will try and be everything up front because they have this big vision of what the product can be. And sometimes the product even is that good to do all those things. But from a marketing perspective, you can't say all those things. You don't have the resources to get all those specific messages out there. So number 1, willing to be specific. Number 2, have a point of view. It's our perspective that the best software out there has really spiky point of views on what's good and what's bad, both in the markets they're going after and even in the world in general, right? And this starts to get us a little bit into brand. But what we see all the time when companies are small is they're afraid to poke the bear, which is weird because in their investor decks, they'll say stuff like, hey, we're going to disrupt this industry and this company. And then in their marketing, they try and tread lightly. And we think that's bad. Like one good way to stand out, have a really unique point of view and beat that drum and be willing to piss someone off, right? Like you almost look at it as if your marketing doesn't make someone, if your marketing doesn't have someone disagree with you, it's probably not that good of marketing in the first place. And number 3 is being willing to focus on one channel at a time. And AI is making this a worse problem because too many companies think they can get away with covering every channel and going multi-channel and multi-segment across the board. We're going to do blogs, we're going to do social, we're going to start a podcast, we're going to run ads, all these things. And sure, those things are now easier to do, but they're harder to do well and make them effective. And so when you're a smaller company, you have to be willing to go really specific. And for example, my company, we have one channel that we focus on. Now we do other things, we get on podcasts occasionally, but it's only when they bubble up. We just do LinkedIn organic content. And that's driven millions of dollars to our business just by focusing on one thing because we've been able to get really, really good at it. And eventually we will move into those other channels, but you got to sequence those things. And so to recap, it's be willing to be specific on who you're for and what you do, be willing to have a spiky and aggressive point of view, focus on one channel and one tactic at a time.
Right. And I think also the point there that you're giving is there's just too many companies in the market creating amazing products. So if you're just trying to compete with all of them without you having enough time and specificity to be the best at it, you're probably going to struggle. And we see so many startups struggling. Okay, that's a good tip. Do you have other main tip, or that would be the main one to start with?
Those are the main. If you solve all 3 of those, you're going to have a really effective marketing program. You can get nuanced of like other best practices and things, but they're probably not worthwhile. But like having those 3 pillars and getting them right, more important than anything else.
I don't know if I got the 3 points so clearly in my mind. Could we recap that? So the first one would be narrow down.
Narrow down. Be willing to be specific, especially when you're early. Small, like when you shrink your target market, even by just saying, we are for you specifically, your differentiation drastically goes up because every other company that says, hey, we're for multiple types of companies, you're already 10x better than them just when they show up, right? So that's like it, but it's a tactic most startups don't want to do because it really conflicts with their vision of dominating the world. So specific on who you're for and what you do. Have an aggressive point of view. Say something that's going to piss people off. Like even the way you build your product should have an opinion and it should show up. This is the way we think things should work because we foundationally think that the way things have done before are broken. That framing and that messaging will draw people to you that buy into your point of view. It's also going to detract people that don't have that point of view, which is a good thing. And this is like another subtlety in this, is that most people think marketing is making everybody aware of your product. Wrong. Marketing is for making people that are good fit for your product aware of your product. So it is a filtering mechanism as much as it is a traction and awareness mechanism.
Well, yeah, that's very.
So that's number two.
Mm-hmm.
And then number three is do one thing at a time. Focus on one channel and one tactic and get really good at that and make it operational before you layer on and go multi-channel, multi-tactic, and then even expand into adjacent segments. You really got to break those off bit by bit, because if you try and, devour the whale in one bite and do everything, you're much more likely to fail.
Amazing. Great. That's an awesome explanation. It made me think of, I'm Latin American, so it made me think of Nubank. Have you seen, that great boom of Nubank? We have some connections with David, the owner, and then I was thinking on just that. He didn't say like I'm gonna start a digital bank that is going to cover everything, because he knew he couldn't compete in every way, but there was this one segment of population of people that were unbanked, and then he just realized different opportunities, and he got that message. It was like a revolutionary campaign, saying almost like, why are we just receiving so much difficulties from banks and yet keep trying to get yet keep being their clients. Like, we can decide what is best for us, and we can have lower fares, we can have not spend hours in offices trying to do paperwork, and so many things like that. So I was just thinking on him tacking all of those boxes, right? Like niching down and then being disruptive.
And when you narrow, effectively the goal when you narrow is to dominate that market, because you're the only one willing to show up that specifically. And then you can use that momentum to go after other markets. Other really famous examples of this, think PayPal when they came out. They're everywhere today. You can PayPal checkout almost on any website and all these different merchants. When they started, they didn't come and say, hey, we're going to be the merchant for the internet. That was very much the vision. They basically said, hey, where are there a lot of transactions that are a big pain in the ass to handle? They went to eBay specifically. That was their first market segment. And not even that, they went to eBay sellers, basically like the stay-at-home moms that are going from garage sale to garage sale, reselling stuff in high volume, like these small kind of e-commerce stores. And they went to them and they said, hey, stop doing this check cash thing that you're doing. You should use PayPal instead. They dominated this small little niche market that is eBay. And then once they had that, they had this momentum to move into other market players, and kind of the rest is history as they kind of cascaded across all these different markets. And so it's like, start small, dominate the market, and expand from there. It's like a playbook that almost always works. Now you have to have a killer product. You have to actually win the markets. You got to execute, but conceptually from a strategy, like that is definitely the path.
Awesome. And now, getting deeper into how to do this with HR. So could we use these three main points you were mentioning for HR, or what would be the framework you would use for HR marketing, employer branding, talent attraction, all those trends?
Well, let's try and fold them in. This is where things get really interesting, right? Okay. How does our framework on positioning and messaging fold into recruiting? And so I'll kind of intro with a bit of a conceptual approach, and then I'll let you kind of come in and we'll sort of develop a scenario live and see if we can kind of take it through from beginning to end. And so foundationally, when you are recruiting, you are trying to get people to join your organization. You want something from them, and you have some things to offer in exchange. That equation, very similar to being a marketer and going after customers. You want them to buy your product. You have something to offer them. And so foundationally, it's like, okay, those are equal. And so from a mechanic standpoint of figuring out like, well, what do we say to get them to care? It kind of comes back to unique differentiation. And so my point number one, be willing to get specific. And I'm not so sure this is a challenge for a lot of the HR staffs, but I have a perspective, and then maybe you can pipe in and share what you've seen in the field. But be really specific on not only the role, but the type of person that's going to fill that role. And be aggressively specific of specific backgrounds that they have, technologies they've learned. And so again, maybe this isn't a real problem, but really labeling this is exactly who we need to fill this role is sort of step one to figuring out then, okay, if those are who we're going after. Now, this is where like the point of view comes in a little bit, but I'll bring in more of our positioning framework. Once you've identified your target audience, so let's say it's like a senior Java developer, right? Let's say you're trying to hire that role.
Yeah.
You then have to look at like, okay, from a hiring standpoint, what are you competing with relative to what you have to offer? And this is where companies basically have different features and benefits that they can offer potential employees to get awareness and intrigue them enough to actually meet with them and eventually, take the job and get hired. Same workflow for customers. And so you have to be really honest about, hey, this type of role that we're going after, what are the other options they have on the table, right? And this is where maybe it gets a little complex of like, are they looking for getting into a specific industry? Are you competing with some of the big players in the technical space, like the FANGs, like the Apples and Googles of the world, or like, oh, that's their dream job. But when you think about it in that comparison, you can't offer what Apple and Google have in most cases, which is prestige and brand and credibility. Yeah. And so this is where, from a hiring perspective, psychographics really matter. And so what do I mean by psychographics? What I mean by this is like, what do people really want out of a job? And I think the mistake I've seen a lot of companies make is they approach this as if like, yeah, people are looking for a job that's stable, that they're going to have their whole lives. And they view it sort of like joining a family. And for some people, that could be true, right? You have to know who you're going after. But I would say that that's a generational thing that has shifted. That is not how people are getting jobs today. They are very self-centered because we're just human after all. And they're going to have a specific tactical thing in mind, right? Are they trying to get exposure to a specific industry? Are they trying to get exposure to a specific tech stack? Do they want to work on a certain type of product? Are they looking for a bounce pad to get to an even better job or a higher salary or a different role that they've never had exposure into? Those are the things that matter more. And when you know that, you can start to frame some of the value related to that. And so I had a founder that I almost joined his company. This was maybe 5 or 10 years ago. He used to use this phrase that when it comes to hiring for jobs he saw them as tours of duty. And his way of explaining it is like, yeah, they are commitments of 18 months to 3 years of, hey, I'm going to go do this. And there's this very clear trade of like, you're going to give me the skill, and in return, you're going to give me, money and experience. And we'll talk about the other things you can bring in. And that really resonated to me. And I think aligns to how a lot of folks actually approach taking a job. Is in today's world, they want the flexibility. And so like looking beyond 3 years is sort of silly in a lot of cases. And when you have it in that framing, you can then start to figure out, all right, what are the unique things I can offer this person over the next 3 years that these other hiring companies cannot? And so that's where we start to surface unique differentiation. And so I'll pause there because that's conceptually how I would tee this up. And then maybe we can get into some examples. I can share some experiences I've had with like unique offers that have come to me from different companies that were offering very different things to really highlight this component of very specific features and differentiation versus a competitive alternative, other hiring companies.
Right. Yeah. So I think there's two points very interesting there that you mentioned, and one is you also niche down to your target audience, which was one of the first things that you were saying, that basically you don't want to let everyone know that you're a great employer. You want to let in this case, the engineering community, which is a very different community from, let's say, the marketing community or lawyers, or it's all very different segments of population, and you want to let them know this is the best engineering employer, and what do engineers want, right? So I was thinking several things there that actually make a lot of sense of that from the HR point of view, and one of them is, if you understand even further than that, and this is very interesting, we've seen this in recruitment, is even programming language can be a great predictor for trends in the personality of the person you're hiring. When you're hiring a Java developer, for example, that's a very different customer persona than when you're hiring. I was in the Web2 industry for a long time, so I have seen this big scope of, a Java developer is like in the opposite side of the scale from a Web3 developer, a Solidity developer, or even a Rust developer that is very, very complex programming language where they just build this incredible infrastructure, but those guys are up for the technical challenge. So if you offer them a ton of money do something simple, they would be like, that would make me grow. So that goes to your point of basically this trade of, I give you my skills, you give me experience and money, right? So that I
Yeah.
can keep growing. And then in the being very specific, then you have all of these features of understanding, like, what is it, like they probably want 5 things, but what is the one thing that I want to compete at? Some people will, like, I'm a startup. I have to develop a lot, so I cannot tell them you're gonna have super flexible schedule and this is gonna be a stress-free job. So when you can win, and you're like,
Yeah.
okay, but maybe huge corporations, they don't have the possibility of helping these people travel around the world as they work. So I'm gonna create these digital nomad kind of employer environment so that it is very friendly for them to be with me, and I'm going to hire top engineers that are being digital nomads, something like that.
Yeah.
Sounds like a great strategy, actually.
Yeah.
And then how has it been in your side? How has it been in your side, that differentiation? What has caught your eye through the years on being recruited?
Yeah.
What has
And
worked?
so I'll share. I've got 3 stories basically where I was offered very different things. And keep in mind, for the folks you're hiring, everyone's career journey, really life journey in general, is going to be dynamic. So these things are in flux, which we're humans. That's why this is complex. So like pinpointing these can be difficult. But when you have conversations with folks, you can figure this out. And so there was early in my career, a lot of folks don't know this. I actually used to be a biomedical engineer. So I was in the healthcare space before I got into SaaS. It's what I studied at university for, went to grad school for, although grad school is a little bit more for like commercialization. So I knew I wanted to get out of the engineering piece. And so for me, if somebody like saw my trajectory, and I was very upfront at the roles I was looking for, so I was basically trying to break into sales. I got some advice from a mentor early on. I had shared with him, I'm like, hey, I'm really interested in building companies and entrepreneurship and commercialization, but all my experience and skills are in engineering, right? Product development, engineering, and specifically in healthcare, not even in SaaS. And their advice was, all right, go spend time in sales. And so for me, I was on a mission of like, I need to break into sales somehow, right? And so I was interviewing at a bunch of really software companies primarily, but startups. And all the ones that I spoke to, they saw my background and they were like, man, this guy could help us with, often it was like technical implementations, because they saw my technical background. They saw I had decent communication skills. They weren't great at the time. And so they were trying to put me into this role that fit for them, but they weren't really considering what I cared about. And so it wasn't until there was this company that I spoke to, this startup. They're called Four Winds Interactive. They were based in Denver, Colorado. And they saw me and literally listened, and I was like, hey, I have this technical background. I want to move into sales. And they saw that as an opportunity, and they reframed their whole role. They're like, hey, we're a startup. It's scrappy. Everyone does a little bit of everything, but like, you should probably go on this sales engineering track. And so there was like this perfect bridge that they basically pitched me, and we're like, hey, we're going to have you do some technical stuff, but like within 6 to 12 months, we want you in this sales engineering role where you can be in front of customers and be selling and do all that. And that's going to create a path to like maybe become an account executive, maybe run a sales team. To me, it was music to my ears. And so like, even if you showed up to me as a separate employer with an offer, and we're offering me different money and all these things, this company was offering me what I really wanted. They were positioning against, hey, we know all these other companies are going to put you in a technical box. We're willing to take a bet on you. And so what they were really offering was exposure. They were going to help me with my pivot, right? And so that was like a really unique experience in terms of how this employer could frame to get me as an employee coming in that did have some skills, albeit they had to kind of meet me where I was relative to where they were. Now, flash forward a couple of years, I followed that trajectory. Like, I actually did become an account executive. I did run a small sales team before I got into marketing. And there was this time where at that very same startup, we had exited into, we sold to Vista Equity Group. And so I was looking for different opportunities then, primarily in product consulting, product marketing, because I was doing some of that near the end of my kind of tour of duty at that company. But I was a startup person. So I was looking for startups, but Oracle came along kind of out of the blue. Huge company, 160,000 company, was not even on my radar, to be honest. And they showed up to me and basically framed like, hey, we've seen you done this product stuff, this sales stuff. We know you do that. You're trying to get into the marketing piece. And they basically were like, hey, we could take all of that and give you resources to go and learn how to do kind of innovation, commercialization, and marketing at Oracle. And so they were offering what they could offer, which is basically access to resources, a little bit of brand credibility because they're a big company, and much more money than anyone else. And so at that point in my career where it was like, all right, I've learned these things, it's time to earn a little bit more, they had positioned themselves so perfectly where I had to jump at the offer, where like, even though I wanted to be in startups, they kind of framed it as like, no, you'll be doing startup like stuff just in a bigger company. And so it's just like dynamic pitching that they did. And the funny thing about that is like, this is where like, marketing and delivery maybe disconnect from a point, is all those promises they made never totally came to fruition. The role wasn't what I thought it was going to be. And so that's a secondary issue of like actually delivering on promises and that sort of thing. And then I'll share my last sort of tour duty. As I was leaving Oracle, I was going back into the startup world, and I knew that. And so I was comparing joining startups, mostly around the seed Series A stage. But this one company came along, and they called themselves a digital product studio, basically a venture studio for startups. And they couldn't offer what the startups could offer, because the startups were offering kind of like, hey, here's equity and here's how to like, build and grow this thing. Very intriguing to me. So this company they're basically an agency. They framed their whole value more towards exposure and true like agency and ownership. They said, hey, we're smaller, but we work with it. Like all our customers are startups. Why go work for one startup when you could work for 10 every year? And not only that, we're building this whole new product strategy, product marketing service arm. We want you to go lead that. And so to them, they basically came in with offering something that these other startup companies couldn't offer, because they were willing to be like, hey, we'll give you, you can go pretty much do what you want and you'll get exposure to all these things. Very appealing to me. And I ended up joining them. And that was the last really job I had before starting Fletch, our company today. And so I'll pause, but those three narratives to me is like, the framing, it's interesting, had very little to do with the job and a lot more to do with like my personal goals relative to what they could offer. And they were highlighting their features and benefits that were unique to them to make them super compelling.
And I think the smart thing there is that, we spoke about a bit of that when we met, this customization. Like when you're a smaller company, you get to give your clients not necessarily exactly what they want, but you're much closer than big companies that are offering these more generic solutions. And then when you're going in this position in Oracle, that they said like, this is going to be super startup, this, that, but in reality that company is so structured already that they really would have to do like very big changes in their structures and their procedures and in so many things to actually customize that role for you. Where in these startups, in these agencies, it was actually easy. So I think that's a great advantage of startups, isn't it? Like they can really tweak things, they can iterate, they can do customization, and definitely this is a really good tip for especially hiring managers when they're having that final conversation, trying to close, which is very common. I think people know the other side of the hiring world, which is a world where people are looking for a job like crazy, and it's a difficult market to get a job in. But I come from the headhunting kind of market, and in this environment, you're a seller. So we all the time considered ourselves like commercial. It was a commercial position, a headhunting position. You were always taking people that were sitting in amazing companies with great products. You wanted the best person. So you wanted the best company in the right country with the right product. And these people would have equity, they would have growth opportunities, they would have a team that they already built. So it was really tough to convince these people to go and venture in a new journey with another startup. And I think definitely in that headhunting world, you really realize how much you need those selling skills, how you need to do all of these things that you're mentioning there. And it's basically, how do you really read that person when you're having the interview? How do you really understand their movers, which was one of the first things we were taught when headhunting, was like really read people's movers, know what is their, what gets them from one place to another, and just use their movers for them. So you see if they have kids, then try to see if this role has flexibility and pitch that to them. And in
our model, like tactically, if you're a hiring manager trying to apply this, the way to think about it, or another way to think about it, which maybe is more on the marketing side, is what are you really competing with for this person?
Right.
And this is why getting really specific matters. Because if you just say, oh yeah, we're looking for a Java developer, well, those come in different flavors, right? Like, what are the archetypes of Java developers? And this is like, junior to senior, where are they at in their career? All the attributes you start to bring up of like family and their context. If you really sit down and figure out like, no, this is exactly the type of person we want, you then do the exercise of like, what's the competitive alternative? Who's going to swoop this person up, or who is currently this person working for? What do they do well? But more importantly, where are they lacking? Because where they're lacking is where there's opportunity for you to come in, right? If you spot a person, especially the headhunters, maybe even a better example. If you spot a person who has had a great career, they're at a company, they've been there 5 or 10 years, you could literally just look at the company and their role and be like, you know what? I bet their weakness is there. I bet you it's comp. I bet you it's lack of equity. And I bet you it's freedom. It looks like, oh, they're sitting below. There's like 2 layers of management. Like those already start to give me potential ideas of like, what can we offer them that obviously they're not getting today? It's like, that junior VP where you're at, it's like we can make them a senior VP, right? It's a little bit of a leap of where they're at, but we feel that they're going to get to that point. And you can start to pull those strings, right? And so it's all about framing this. So going back to those initial core points, it's like, what's the specific like person you're for? That's the willing to get specific of who you're going after. Having an aggressive point of view or a spiky point of view is just being willing to come to that person and tell them like, hey, I bet you're paid pretty well, you're doing all right, but you're sitting under management. I bet you don't have a lot of equity and a lot of freedom. Those are things I'm willing to offer you. And like that third piece is just your product differentiation, right? Like your job differentiation. And so those three, it's like, it literally is that triad. Hyper specific who, competitive alternative that you're fighting for that person or that customer in this case, what their tool they're using. And then where do you fit in between those? And what you might find, and if you get to this point, it's like you've got a different problem. If you don't have other things to offer, you have to be honest with yourself and then say, we probably aren't going to convince someone. Like we don't have a compelling enough offer. And then like people be like, no, we have to try. And it's like, no, you're probably going to bang your head against the wall, spend a lot of time, money, and resources going and doing something that's likely not going to work. And, this goes back to, we were talking about, we do marketing for startups. We see that happen sometimes. We're like, well, we got to do something where sometimes it's just awareness of, do we actually have differentiation for this thing we're going after? And if you don't, guess what? You change who you're going after. If you can't get the elite who, you got to say, well, I guess we got to go to the medium Java developer. We have some differentiation there. And then from a people development standpoint, you just have to know that and be aware and be like, well, we probably then should invest in some development for this person. Let's give them programs. Let's give them mentorship, other things. And so, that's a piece that didn't come up, at least in my list, but it's like being honest about where you're at and what you really can do is a key piece of coming up with a good offer.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting how all of these parallels, I thought they might be more isolated, but it's the exact same case in both sides. Like in product, it's the side of like, I would like to compete for the wealthiest clients and the clients that are asking for all of this, but in reality, there's for example, in the banking world, with like this new bank case that we were speaking about, the guy didn't decide to go for the wealthiest people, which is where many people would put their eye. They would be like, okay, what's the new fintech product that I can build and I can attract all of these wealthy people and get them on board. He actually created an extremely successful bank from starting with unbanked people that had low resources. Isn't that a genius thing? Like they weren't being seen as a probable audience, and then the guy was like, yeah, I could. He probably thought about it. He probably thought about like, I can build a product that can beat big banks. And then he said like, let's be realistic. I have this amount of money. I have these possibilities. I can beat banks at where they're not playing. And I think this is amazing. And it happens a lot with startups. They want, let's say they want a VP from JP Morgan that has been in trading, and they want to onboard him for their fintech or their crypto or whatever startup. And then you just realize that audience is not going to make that leap. And then you can find someone that is actually more junior, that might have a lot more energy, more enthusiasm, more ideas, and you can just train them. You can just do the extra effort. And I think with Nubank was the same. Like he didn't start a product that would immediately make him rich, but in the beginning he was doing a great service and he expanded, and then at some point he started onboarding more and more wealthy people, and he started getting more money on board, and so you just have to work it from a lower point, which I think it's your observation of many startups. They just want to start already by winning, and sometimes you have
and you're nailing it
before you're a winner, right?
Like what you're nailing is that on paper markets look very clean. Oh, the banking market. But with your example, like, are you a 1%er or are you unbanked, right? And there's like the wealth discrepancy. They're just so, like, the contrast makes it extreme. Where it gets really messy is when they get a little bit closer together, where it's like, oh, maybe not a 1%er, but you're in the top 20%. Is that close enough to the 50%? I would even argue those striations are very different. Those folks need different banking features. And so from a marketing and messaging standpoint of how you show up, you can't show up the same way to everyone. Like, just even imagine how silly that would be, showing up to, someone worth $100 million and showing up saying, hey, check out this like really easy mobile app that you're going to be able to use. And we have a buy now, pay later. And hey, we can get you, we can get you paid before your paycheck, in case things are tight. It's like that whole message is like, it's not even going to touch the $100 million person. It's like, that's not how they bank. Right? They don't think of it that way. Like, the daily transactions for them aren't a big deal. They think in more of macro. And so it's why that, back to the core point, like, be specific. The who drives all of this. And I don't think it's greed necessarily. I think it's a little bit of ignorance to think you can go after all of these. But it's what creates all the bad messaging, all the bad marketing out there, whether you're trying to get employees or whatever, because it's just generic. And in today's world, where now you're bombarded with content and messages all over the place, you're not going to stand out. You're not going to be believable. You're going to just go unnoticed unless you're really willing to get hyper specific on who you're for.
Yeah, and I think that has two big points there. And so one point is obviously the integrity of your offering, which I was just reflecting on as you were saying that on when you offer so much and you don't deliver, you're bound to get really bad references from other people, and actually a lot of the natural, the growth is just very organic. Like, you have a happy customer that just happily shares that with his family and his friends, and a lot of the marketing actually happens that way. And then when you're just the startup and you're trying to build the ecosystem and do everything, you'll have unhappy clients unless you're amazing and you're able to build an ecosystem like this. And I think the other big point is that if you just want to win right away, you might make a lot of mistakes. If you want to be like if you want to be an employer with a lot of integrity, and you want to say like, okay, what's best for people? Like, if I was an employee, what would I like to have? And then you kind of accommodate that to the buyer persona that you're putting, like tweaking it. Naturally, if you're very righteous in the way you're being an employer, there's going to happen something very positive around you, and there's going to be natural marketing of people speaking well about it.
You just touched on something that I think, I'm so glad you hit on it because it's so important, is customers talk to each other. Employees talk to each other. And so there's this funny thing where sometimes your marketing can overreach your ability to deliver. And it has what you called out, it has a net negative effect, right? You're not in isolation. So like, I would say my Oracle example, their offer and the way they showed up to me got me to join. And I don't want to knock Oracle. They're a wonderful company. Now, from a job perspective of what I did and like my psychographics of what I was doing, I'm actually a kind of a detractor for them, to where peers that I have, if I see myself and somebody asks me advice of what they're trying to do, and I see myself, where I was and where they're at in their career trajectory, I'm going to recommend no. I'm like, well, wait, is this based on what you want? I'd be like, hey, here's my experience. It wasn't good. And so this is where this is really tricky to figure out, where it doesn't fall completely on marketing or completely on the hiring people. But it's important that what you show up with and your offers are rooted in reality. Because if you don't deliver, you'll get the short-term upside. Great, they joined. Great, we got the customer. But the net negative, they're going to leave. And then when they leave, they're going to start to poison the pool, so to speak,
Mm.
of folks that now your message, they say they're really good, but they're not, right? And there's more transparency now, I would say. There's the glass doors out there, but word of mouth and social and all that, like, word's gonna get out. And so this is more of product message alignment, right? Like offer ability to deliver alignment. And so I'm really glad you brought it up, because I think it's a really unique angle where marketing might do too much, hiring teams might say too much, and then be doing more harm than good.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think in marketing, you observe it all the time that you have to know where you're playing. If you're just selling people a simple daily commodity, then people won't make much reviews of it. But every time you're gonna buy you're gonna buy a phone, you would definitely read a couple of reviews, or you at least ask an expert, or you would ask a friend. And then with the work is the same. So
Yeah.
you can have an amazing marketing, but if what you're truly offering their insight is not great, people are very quickly going to know about it through Glassdoor, which is I think it's an amazing example, very interesting example of there you can, it's your best market research. Read your Glassdoor.
Yeah.
Many of us do that in HR. We just read the Glassdoor for our companies, and there we're like, okay, I'm very aware of what is being said of my company. Now, how do I turn this around to people? So then how do I just go straight forward and say, this is a company where we work a lot. The work-life balance here could be a difficult spot, but we have these other counterparts. And then when you mention it straightforward, it kind of mitigates, as if instead of you trying to cover that up. So yeah, that's amazing. It actually fits really well. I think this was an easier experiment. So it basically shows if you do those three things, you're gonna be better. What do you feel would be missing? Do you have any feeling like in HR specifically, I would add this component, or I would also focus on this, that, or do you feel like you can use the normal framework?
I think there's nuances that I don't know enough about in the HR realm to even speak to overall. And so I think the framework can be applied sort of in somewhat of a direct way. And so I don't have much to add there. Other than, like, I guess I have an opinion just on hiring, and I don't have an answer for this. So maybe this will stir conversation if you're in your audience. Is the awkward thing about hiring is it is this somewhat longer term commitment. In my eyes, it's a 12 to 36 month type commitment on both sides, at least up front. You don't really know what you're going to get until they're in there. And so one thing I've been really curious about, at least in my business, about how we hire folks is is there a better way for us to bring them into the company, have us work together and really see if it's a fit before making that commitment? And you see a variation of this of, like, contract to hire, extended test projects, live projects. We do kind of a combination of both in my business, where we start with test projects where we get to collaborate with them a bit. We pay them for it. And then we bring the folks on actually as contractors when they start for us. And it works pretty well with our business model because we're a small company. And so that's not an option for other folks. But it really lets us suss out, like, who really is going to fit beyond the, a 6-month tour of duty, like who actually is going to be here for a year. And what it helps with is, like, with each one of those milestones, we can reallocate what we're offering and what the trade is. I think one of the squishy things about jobs is that the trade is often very awkward, because it's assumed that, it's in perpetuity, I'm going to be here forever, when that's, like, not really the case. And I think it leads to a lot of this, like, bad behavior and bad communication and action that can happen because the parties just aren't clear on what they get. And so again, that might be a wrench in all of this. I think where it comes back to messaging and shaping is being really honest about the milestones, being really honest about what you're offering. And then the gap that, like, my question maybe to your community is, like, what does it look like to really touch it and have those honest conversations? And anecdotally, the very best experiences I've had are when the people who hire me are willing to sit me down and be like, hey, here's how things are going. Truthfully, what's going to happen in the next 6 or 12 months? And that it requires a two-way communication, and it requires also, like, some vision on the employee's part. Like, they have to tell you what they want. And if they don't know, then it's part of your job to help frame that and be very clear. It's like, hey, I see two paths. you could do this or you could do this. And there's also a third path. If none of those sound good, you know, this relationship breaks professionally, and I help you find the path that you want to get on. And I don't think that gets brought up enough, because I think the, get a job transaction is very transactional, and there aren't very clear on those outcomes. And so I don't know if you have a perspective on that or what you've seen just based on what you do, but it's one of those things in hiring that's very front of mind for me now.
So in several points of what you're saying, but one of them is that poker game that is played in companies. I think that's a complex one. And obviously it's the same thing with marketing and then customer experience, which basically in marketing you're expecting that customer experience is going to fulfill, because you promise the customer all of these amazing things, even more in sales, because in marketing it's a bit, you're creating a beautiful way of communicating the product, but in sales you're like kind of promising more. So, once they already see someone in sales, that person is promising a lot of things, and then hoping that all of that is going to get delivered. And in HR, it's just the same. So as a recruiter, you're selling all of this from your company, but then having really close contact with employer experience, which is something that in some companies already has a position. There's a person like, I'm in charge of employer experience, instead of calling it like, they call it well-being, or I think employer experience is just a deeper thing because it has to do with career paths. So I think that's the first point. That would be my advice, like to that issue in what you're promising and what you're actually delivering to your customers. In this case, your recruitees, your employees. And my advice would simply be, if you create a really, really strong culture of clear growth careers, very clear, like very, very clear steps in people's growth. Like if you do this, and that, you're gonna grow here. If you're able to do that in your company, people are gonna feel, they're gonna feel like it's very transparent, and they're gonna be like, I'm in or I'm not. They'll be like,
what's your take on employees that don't want the growth? Because I've seen an interesting thing. I've actually seen it with developers sometimes, where they come in and they want a job. They want stability, they want pay, and sure, they'd like that pay to go up. But I've seen some resistance sometimes to like, we want to get you, are you a manager? Are you an IC? And we want to get you into these roles. And ironically enough, where I've seen it is some of the most talented developers, sometimes they just want to be left in a dark room, throw me cool shit to work on, and pay me well. And so this talk of growth to them is like, it's like, oh, get that away from me, where you're actually, to them, you're creating a poor thing. It's like, this goes back to just understanding what they're really after, where it's like, growth is assumed. Is that a dangerous thing? Because I see just a lot of folks out there that are like, growth, oh, I got to do that. I got to fill out my goals and do it. Some people don't want to do that at all. They're like, I want a job, I want to be paid well, and I want to do the, like, I like, it's usually the people who like their job and their craft the most. Yeah. And they're not in it for the, oh, I can't wait to be a level 5 engineer or whatever it is. They're just like, I just want to be an engineer in a company.
And many of them, they get paid well enough for being a developer. So they don't want to have the responsibility in their shoulders of the whole app crashed and it's your fault and now go fix it. And many of them, the interpersonal skills to just go and have hard conversations with the other developers and make them, deliver in the proper times and get their productivity up. They simply they simply have no intention of getting in that very uncomfortable zone for the money. So they're like, this is good enough. And I think the issue there is the career path is not clear. They think if they're amazing engineers, they're going to get to manager position. And then you just have to build different things. You just have to build different ways of rewarding them for the time they stay with you. But that
I bring up another rogue topic that I think is really interesting as it relates to employees is incentives. I'd be curious of your take on that, because I have a view, and not everyone shares this. It's like, I don't know if it's Charlie Munger or Warren Buffett. They have a quote. It's like, show me the incentive, I'll show you the result. And I think there's so much merit to that. I've seen it firsthand. So for context, I'll go back to my Oracle. One of the big projects I worked on at Oracle, they were trying to figure out how to sell multi-product deals across these big product pillars across the org. And couple issues. It's huge, complex products. So you're talking about merging like a huge HR solution with like a supply chain solution with like an ERP solution. Like we should just be selling everything all together. It's like, all right, decent thought. The issue is those are separate teams with separate products and separate sales reps. And when you look at the incentives of those sales reps, they're incentivized. Like if I'm in HR, I'm incentivized to sell an HR deal. And so we started putting together these programs like, hey, here's how you sell multi-product deals. Where we ran into, and honestly, they never got it to work because they never were willing to change the incentives, is why would I introduce an ERP product to slow down my deal? Especially salespeople, I get paid to sell HR tools. And so like one of the things I think where there's tons of room for innovation, not only in getting people to join your company, but also just making sure that they're doing really good work, is to incentivize either the outcome or the good behavior you're looking for. And so it's something we look for in our business is like, how do we get them to care as much about, and again, this is where you have to figure out like, what are you really incentivizing? Because it can't be all the things and it can't be overly complex. Salespeople's pretty straightforward, sell more, you'll get more. Developers and technical roles get a little bit different, but like if you frame the incentives correctly, you can probably get this amazing behavior and get them to buy into your programs. And so I'd be curious, I don't know, again, it's kind of an open-ended topic, but it's one of these things that I think we take these roles and we adopt these incentives that have been around for decades. And I think it's a huge area of opportunity for companies, especially companies that don't have big brand recognition, to get people in the org and actually get them to do incredible work.
Yeah, I think something that many companies think that they have to do a lot is pay, which is right, and I think that's where I think it was Charlie Munger more than Warren Buffett. I also don't remember, but that's not the only way. And culture is this thing that we've been speaking a lot about, but culture is really rewarding. And I think as human beings, I'm a psychologist, so that's where my psychology comes from. It's like we're already quite well programmed to be very vulnerable to social I don't want to say pressure, but like to social frameworks. So if you in your company, I think the best way to reward, before you go into monetary incentives, flexibility incentives, all of these post-pandemic incentives that have started, that are all very interesting. I think companies are really thinking through how to create amazing incentives that make people stay with them and be happy, and also at the same time share that these companies are a great employer. But in the beginning, what you have to do is really be very detail oriented in behavior. You have to be very detail oriented. And for example, I think in Oracle, before you change the structure of how you're going to pay people to do multi-deal, what was the name? Multi-product deals?
Multi-product, yeah, like enterprise, large multi-product enterprise deals.
So before that, you have to see, okay, what's happening in my culture? Okay, probably people are just also very competitive. That could be one. Or maybe people, they're not feeling Oracle strongly enough, like waving the flag of Oracle, like this company is amazing and I want to make this grow, and I want to get companies to have all Oracle in them because other companies don't have the quality that we have. So you have to start to see where the behaviors, the belief systems, where all of that is functioning in people before you start to do incentives. Because I think sometimes incentives are too, I wouldn't say naive, but at least too simplistic. People are just wanting to say like, okay, I'm going to monetize this behavior and create some indicators for it and then monetize that. And that works in a simple way. But if you accompany that with this organizational change, with this culture change, and you start rewarding certain behaviors like collaboration, like how many, and then you can do this in so many different ways. Like if you have developers, then how many lines of code of other people have you checked and corrected? How many? Yeah. I know, like for example, if they have GitHub, you can track so much of their activity and what they've been doing there, and you can just do kudos for that. You can, and that kudos after the end of the year can become a bonus. But you started with a social interaction. You start creating this framework of like, we're not just people that come to the office. We are people that knows how to support other people, that we have empathy. So you just start to highlight that value in the company of empathy is key. And you just create, a beautiful slogan and a beautiful, which for many people is like, oh, HR with their things, they're always like, this,
Yeah.
I don't care for that, I'm here for the money. And what I've seen is that is not true, because we are very, very, very vulnerable to social pressure, interaction.
Well, I think it depends on the company. There are definitely mission-driven companies that are working on big problems. Again, most of my experience is in B2B software. I think in most of the cases, the theoretical, like mission-oriented folks, I think they're few and far between in that space. But when you start to move into certain industries, renewable energy and all that sort of stuff, that mission-driven stuff can really matter. Yes. And so I think where we definitely agree is your point on mapping it to the behavioral kind of constructs of the role and the company is spot on. And so like even back to that Oracle example, that was step number one. It was like, why isn't this happening today? And like then you find out like the mindset of a salesperson, which if you spend any time around B2B sales, they are coin operated. I have a bag, I have a quota, and they are competitive, but it's very binary. I know when I've won and I know when I've lost. And that's how they think about things. And so it's what makes them really good, because they're hell bent on getting deals across the finish line, getting people to sign on the line. And so us introducing or trying to introduce this program of like, hey, we're trying to do this multi-product thing, to them, it was like, yep, that's in the way of me winning in their framing from a behavioral level. But yeah, we totally agree. Like it all comes back to the social constructs first as you start to design those incentives.
That's amazing. Yeah, it is. And I really want to thank you for showing this whole model. I think this was actually, for me, it was a lot of insights. Like I got a lot of insights about hiring and about HR, and mainly about HR is like marketing is something everyone is talking and thinking about, and we don't realize that basically everything that happens in our company is marketing. In the end, is even how happy people are sitting in their desks is marketing. If you know someone that is being miserable in a job in a company, your brain is naturally going to see their product more negatively. So basically everything you're doing, marketing should be a more collective effort of making this company attractive.
As we drop a tactical takeaway for folks who buy into that and want to pull on that thread, go read a book called To Sell is Human by Daniel Pink. It'll change the way you look at human interactions and sales in general. Sometimes it gets a really negative connotation. Can't recommend it enough. It's really solid to double click in what you just shared, Sebastian.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Robert, for your time, for your knowledge, for having this space for us. I just want to maybe recap on the three main points. So I think so could you please recap for us the three main points and whatever you got from this, and then I'll recap my side so that we can do this.
For sure. So whether you're marketing, that's where I come from, or trying to hire people, it comes down to being hyper specific on who you're going after. Psychographics matter. Be willing to be really specific so that you can figure out what you're competing with, so that you can frame the best argument of what your value is. Find things that only you can offer them by looking at what they have available now. We call that the competitive alternative. And in doing so, you'll just craft better offers. You'll get in better conversations. And then I think the other thing that was honestly just discovered in our conversation is be honest what you can do and be as transparent as possible, so that both sides really know what they're getting into. And I think that was a fun part of the conversation for me as we unpack that.
Thank you. Yeah, I think from my side, the main take is integrity. I think that's the thing that I really kept in is there's no way where you can maybe lie to someone on the quality of the pen they just bought. It might just be, just pray for the pen not to break. But when you sell something as big as you were saying, like a 12 months to 36 months live, 8 to 5 or 9 to 6 or whatever the timing is opportunity, people are definitely going to know what you sold. So if you really have integrity and you have that employee experience and you really have clarity on careers, on conversations, on their development and how you're seeing them, you're gonna do great. I think you have to do that core thing. And then the second point for me was what you were mentioning of strength. Like really know what is that one strength that you want to focus of you as an employer that you're going to sell out there, that you're going to market, and go one channel, just show it in one place, be very consistent and keep going there instead of trying to do everything. So yeah, thank you a lot for all of those reflections, and yeah, thank you for this time. Awesome.
Thanks for having me.